Hey guys, today in this tutorial we are going to be looking at how I structure my mixer and my rack when I am mixing a track. We're not going to be going into like mixing techniques so much and stuff like that, maybe in another video, but this time we're just going to be looking at how I lay out a typical track for the purposes of mixing it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time in the sequencer here. This is basically how I lay out my sequencer though. Typically I'll have any vocals up the top. They're muted in this track. I've just been messing around with some stuff, I don't know if I like it, but I'll put the vocals at the top. I color code vocals pink. Then I'll have guitars, which I color code blue, or other kind of synths or keys, bass instruments, which I'll put in this kind of area here. I make basses orange always, and they go next. Then I have like noise or percussive elements, which get color coded gray, and they go next. And then under that I have drums, which get color coded red, and they're at the bottom. And then underneath that I have any kind of like sidechain triggers and stuff, and that's color coded dark gray. And this just lets me see at a glance, if I'm coming back into a track that I haven't worked on for a while, where everything is, what everything is. And I don't know, I just have always kind of liked the idea of stacking it up from the bottom, like drums and then bass and then other things. I've been messing around with putting drums at the top. It doesn't really matter, but whatever way you find works for you, stick to it, because let me tell you, when you haven't opened a track for a year and you go back into it and you haven't labeled things, whew, that is an exercise in patience. So yeah, that's what I've got going on in the sequencer. Not very much that I want to talk about today in regards to that. This is how I tend to organize my mixer, and I've been organizing it this way for quite a while, and I think it works really, really well. What I do is I tend to have my drums on the right hand side in the same way that I stacked my sequencer drums at the bottom and then other stuff out like that. I stack my mixer drums on the right hand side, and then I move back across to the left using essentially the same color scheme and layout as I have in my sequencer. So I start off with my drums to the left, and I've got my noise and percussive stuff here, my bass here, any guitars or pads here, and then vocals on the side here. And I haven't got it in this track, but what I have been tending to do recently is I have a track on top that I color code lemon, and I call this one notes. And in my mixer, that ends up just sitting kind of here off to the side. That's one that I don't use. Like if I could get rid of it from the mixer, I would, but it's just kind of there. And what I use that for is just making like notes in my session. So, you know, let's say that needs more cowbell in this section. I just highlight it like that, draw a clip, add label to clip, and put needs more cowbell. And that way I know that if there's a yellow clip at the top of my track, that I've made a note about something underneath that clip. Something underneath this yellow clip needs some attention. In this case, more cowbell. So that's what I use the notes track for, but then that inevitably ends up with one in my mixer that I just don't really bother touching. So for every section that I have, I create a bus channel for that. You can do that by right clicking and going to route to new output bus or whatever. So all of my guitars are routed to a channel that I call bus guitar. These guitar pads are routed to a channel called bus ambient. All of my basses are routed to bus bass. My noise, bus noise, and my drums, they're grouped into kind of like a category. Like I've got a submix here for my hats, and then I have a submix for my kick and snare, and both the hats and the kick and snare are then routed into the bus for drums. This is my original kick and snare, and then I have some parallel processing that I've done on these two channels. So you do that by going create parallel channel. You can't create a parallel channel on a channel that's already got one. So that would create another parallel channel if I wanted to continue to process the kick and the snare. What I will do sometimes is I will create a sum channel for different things. Like say I wanted to create some parallel channels and parallel process my whole drums bus together. In that instance, I would call this one here sum drums, and then I would take these three and I would go route to new output bus, and I would call this one bus drums. So if I've done parallel processing on my bus group for that channel or for that instrument or that section or whatever, then I end up having like a sum drums one as well, and then a bus drums one at the end. Basically, I try and keep the bus channel the last point where I might put effects and stuff on. So any kind of side chains to the whole section will be done on the bus channel, whereas like if I'm just kind of summing stuff before I want to then go and process it later, that's what I would use like a sum channel for. And drums, of course, have to be red. The reason why labeling it like this is so helpful, I find personally, I've messed around with it a ton over the years, but this is what's stuck. The reason why having it like this is so helpful is if you have a sidechain trigger set up in your rack, like I do here, and you want to route it to somewhere, you can just right click here and then just scroll down, and it's really easy to see, oh, bus guitar, there's my bus channel. I know that if I put a sidechain on my bus guitar channel, it's going to affect everything inside that group, I guess. So I label everything bus in capital letters and then the name of the group, just so it's super easy to find in the sidechain menu when I'm routing stuff. And the other reason why is if you are exporting stems, if you're going bounce mixer channels, it's really easy to get like lost in what mixer channels you want to bounce sometimes. But I know that if I'm bouncing the stems for a project and everything is labeled or everything is grouped in these buses, I just have to scroll down, find my bus ones, tick all of my bus ones, and as long as all of the bus ones are ticked, those are all the stems that I need for the song. So that's why I group stuff and label it like that. I think labeling it in a kind of predictable, sensible fashion, whatever works for you, is the best way to find stuff later on. So this sidechain trigger that I have set up here, that's just a separate channel that's in my sequencer here that is triggering when I've got kicks or snares or whatever I want to sidechain. And I've just gone and set up like a red drum that's linked to some of these splitters. So basically I have as many outputs as I need, and I can just right click here and route that to anything. When I'm sidechaining, I typically will use the channel compressor on the bus. So that's another reason I like having these bus groups and processing stuff like that, is because I often want to use the compressor section on individual channels. Well, I've used it here in the drums. I haven't used it actually a lot on this track. This is a pretty simple track. Usually I have far more channels than this, but I've used the compressor up here. And so by having separate bus channels, it allows me to use the compressor in the mixing thing, in the mixing desk, to sidechain stuff without having to use a separate compressor. There are a bunch of different ways to sidechain things in Reason. This is how I typically end up doing it. So when I'm mixing, I tend to like to kind of not have to leave this window. I like to kind of be mixing from the desk. It kind of feels more real. So when I'm mixing, I kind of have two processes. First process is like what I would call like surgical corrective stuff. So I'll like, you know, go to whatever instrument or whatever channel I'm working on, hit rack, and then go and insert the effects on the actual channel in the rack itself. So on this bus for the bass, I've got an EQ where I've done some corrective surgical EQ, got a compressor, got a pulverizer, and then a multi-band compressor after that. And so that's on on the bass. Because I only have one instrument in this bass, like there are two channels here but it's one sound, I've done all of the processing on the bus. If I have a situation where I have multiple different instruments, like here I've processed, in the drums I've processed the hats and the kick and the snare differently. If that's the case, I will process on the individual channels and then route it to the bus for the drums. But I don't know what I've got on the bus for the drums, like nothing, or just a saturation knob. Like I haven't really got anything on the bus for the drums because I've done the processing on the individual groups for the different sounds here. The reason why, even though these two sounds are still the same sound, the reason why I still label it bus bass is like we talked about before. It's super easy for me to recognize if I'm trying to route a sidechain there or export the mixer file. So that just makes life pretty easy. And even though Reason recently added the thing where you can like grab two knobs and move them, I still like to make volume adjustments in a group. You're only moving one fader, you don't have to make sure you've selected all of the others and stuff like that. And so I tend to kind of add reverb to the tracks as required here with my effects returns. I don't really use any of these inserts here really at all ever. Once I've done the surgical EQ, which I do in the individual channels like that, then I use the EQs on the channel strip for more general. You can see I've only got it mainly on like the buses or the kind of subgroups. I use the EQ on these channel strips for general mixing and general shaping and getting the sound sitting together. Often I will use the compressors on the channel strips. I haven't really used them much for anything other than side chaining in this track. And I use the low pass and high pass filters all the time, often automating them as well, but it doesn't really look like I've automated any of them in this track either. And every now and then I use the gain knobs if I need to kind of adjust the gain on a clip or a track or something. And then I use the master compressor. It's pretty much on just like all the time. I have it kind of set like that, and so it peaks at 4. In my mastering chain, I typically will use this 8-band parallel compression preset from Reason's mastering folder, which I like. I typically then go into this isotope ozone maximizer, and that's basically all I'm doing in terms of mastering on my mastering chain. One thing that I do sometimes, which I haven't done in this track, but let's just say I was going to do it, if I want to apply effects to everything except for like say the vocals or just everything in general, I might highlight all of my buses like that. I highlight all my buses, I go route to new output bus, and I call this one here like master bus, and I usually make that dark grey. That's what I would do if I wanted to put effects on everything. Like I don't really want to kind of touch the mastering chain and do creative stuff on the mastering chain. So if I want to put effects on everything that I'm then going to automate, I would send all of my individual buses to a master bus for some general effects processing. Like sometimes I've used it in the past, I've just like not sent vocals to it and used the master bus as a place to house like a center effect, for example, for some mid-side processing. That's what I would kind of use like a master bus channel for. But other times I've put a center plugin on all of the individual buses as well. So there are a couple of ways of doing it. But yeah, that is my general kind of setup for how I mix in Reason. I know there's like a ton of different ways you can do things in Reason, so I'd love to know how any of you guys mix in Reason or lay out your tracks. I'm always interested in seeing different workflows. But yeah, this track, if you want to actually download it or mess with it, or like rap over it or make a song over it, you can download it for free on my website at the moment. So there's a link for that in the description. Go check that out. Subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave a comment. Tell me if you learned anything. Tell me if you've got any suggestions about things I could incorporate into my workflow. And I'll see you guys next time.